She slipped the note under my coffee cup while her boyfriend was in the washroom. I almost missed it. I'd been watching the snow come down outside the kitchen window, thinking about nothing in particular the way you do when you're 63 and retired and a Sunday afternoon has nowhere urgent to be. My daughter had come for the weekend with the man she'd been seeing for about 8 months, and the three of us had just finished a late lunch of split pea soup and the sourdough I'd baked Friday morning. It was a good afternoon. Quiet, the kind I'd gotten used to since her mother passed. I reached for my mug and felt the paper against my fingers. A receipt from a gas station, folded twice. On the blank side, in her handwriting, small and pressed hard into the paper. Dad. Something is wrong. Please don't react. I need you to help me, but he can't know. I looked at her across the table. She was looking at her phone, or pretending to. She didn't meet my eyes. I put the receipt in my shirt pocket. I picked up my coffee. When he came back from the washroom, I was talking about the Senators game, and I kept talking about it for another 20 minutes, and I did not look at my daughter once. His name was Declan Marsh. He was 41, which made him 11 years older than my daughter, though he looked younger than that. Good haircut, good jacket, the kind of man who knew how to present himself. He'd been introduced to me back in April as a financial advisor, independent practice, offices in the Glebe. He had a firm handshake and remembered my name every time he used it, which was often. He asked good questions and listened to the answers the way people do when they've been taught that listening is a technique. I hadn't disliked him, exactly. I'd been cautious the way fathers are cautious. But I hadn't seen anything that alarmed me. That Sunday evening, after he and my daughter left to drive back to her apartment on Elgin Street, I sat down at the kitchen table with the receipt and read it again. Then I made myself a pot of tea, and I thought for a long time about what kind of help a 30-year-old woman asks for in secret, in her own handwriting, on a scrap of paper passed under a coffee mug so her boyfriend won't see. I didn't sleep much that night. I spent 31 years with the Ontario Securities Commission. I started as an investigator in 1988, when the office was still finding its footing after a few high-profile cases that had embarrassed the province. I worked enforcement for most of my career: securities fraud, market manipulation, unsuitable investment schemes targeting retail investors. I led a team for the last 12 years. I retired in 2019 with a decent pension, a good reference, and a very specific and thoroughly unglamorous understanding of how people take money from other people while making it feel like a gift. My daughter knew some of this. She knew I'd worked in finance regulation. She didn't know the details because I'd been careful about that. Her mother and I had made a decision early on that the job wouldn't follow us home, and for the most part it hadn't. But she knew enough. She knew what I used to do. And she knew that if something felt wrong and she didn't have the words for it yet, I was probably the right person to bring it to. I called her Monday morning, mid-morning, after I was sure he would have left for work. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, I'm not going to ask you anything on the phone," I said. "Can you come this weekend?" A pause. "He'll want to come too. Tell him I need help with something in the basement." That usually discourages people. She laughed, which was a relief. It meant she wasn't frightened. "Not yet, or not in the way I'd worried about." "Saturday," she said. "I'll say I'm coming early to help you cook." She arrived at 10 in the morning with a bag of groceries she'd bought at the Lansdowne market and the look of someone who had been carrying something heavy for longer than she wanted to admit. We didn't talk right away. I made coffee and she unpacked the groceries: a wedge of aged cheddar, a jar of honey, some apples from an orchard I recognized from years of autumn drives with her mother. She moved around my kitchen the way she'd always moved around it, like she still lived here, and for a few minutes we just existed in the same space without any of it. Then she sat down at the table and wrapped her hands around her mug and told me. It had started in July. They'd been together 4 months, and things had been good, she said. He was attentive. He made her laugh. He was interested in her work. She's a speech-language pathologist, works with kids mostly, clinic near Centertown. He came to things. He met her friends and they liked him, and she liked that they liked him. In July he'd mentioned, almost in passing, that he had a client who was about to close a pre-IPO round, a technology company, software infrastructure, the kind of thing that doesn't mean much to most people, but that he'd described with enough detail that it sounded real. He wasn't soliciting her interest, he was just telling her about his day, but when she asked questions, he answered them, and when she said it sounded interesting, he said, well, if she ever wanted to put a small amount in, he could probably get her access through one of his managed accounts. She had some savings. She'd been careful with money since she graduated, which she got from me and from her mother both. She put $12,000 in. He said I'd see the return within 18 months, she told me. He gave me a document. It looked real, Dad. It had a prospectus and everything. I asked her if she still had the document. She pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table. I spent about 15 minutes with it. I didn't say anything while I read. She refilled her coffee and looked out the window at the yard at the bird feeder her mother had put up in 2014 that I still kept filled. When I put it down, she looked at me. How bad, she said. Tell me the rest first, I said. The rest was this. In September, he'd asked her if she wanted to increase her position. The company was doing better than projected. The round was oversubscribed. He could get her in at the same terms if she acted quickly. She'd said she needed to think about it. He hadn't pushed, which she'd found reassuring. Then in October, a few things. He'd started talking about moving in together. He'd mentioned twice that his lease was ending in February. He'd made a comment about her apartment being better located and twice the size of his. He'd asked gently what she paid in rent. He'd also asked about her RRSP, whether she had one, how much was in it, what it was invested in. He'd framed it as professional curiosity, as wanting to make sure she was set up well. She'd answered honestly because she trusted him, and then 3 weeks ago, he'd asked her, very casually over dinner, whether her father owned his house. What did you tell him? I said yes, and then I saw his face change just for a second, and I thought. She stopped. I don't know what I thought, but I started going over all of it. The questions about money, the way he moved through things so slowly, like he had a lot of time. She looked at me. I don't have the right words for it. You have exactly the right instincts, I said. That's enough. The document she'd given me was a forgery. A careful one, but a forgery. I'd spent 3 decades looking at offering memoranda, prospectuses, exemption filings. I knew what the real paperwork looked like, and I knew what it looked like when someone had assembled something to resemble real paperwork without understanding the regulatory infrastructure behind it. The CDAR filing numbers referenced in the document didn't correspond to any actual issuer. The legal firm listed at the bottom had a real name, but the address was wrong by 2 digits, a transposition error someone had either made or left deliberately. The company itself, I checked it against the Ontario Business Registry, the Canada Revenue Agency's business number lookup, CDAR, EDGAR. Nothing. It didn't exist. I didn't tell my daughter everything that afternoon. I told her enough, that the document had problems, that I needed more time, that she should not put any more money in, and that she should not tell Declan she'd spoken to me. She asked me if she should break up with him. I thought about that for a moment. Not yet, I said. Give me 2 weeks. I have a friend I worked with for about 15 years, a woman named Frances who now runs a small investigative firm that does a lot of due diligence work for institutional clients. We'd stayed in touch. I called her Tuesday morning and described the situation in broad terms, leaving out the personal connection for the moment. She ran Declan Marsh through what she had access to. It took her until Thursday. What she found? Declan Marsh had held an investment advisor license in Ontario from 2009 to 2017, when it was suspended following a complaint investigation by IROC. The details of that investigation were not public. He had subsequently operated under a series of numbered companies, 2 of which had been dissolved. He had a civil judgment against him in Quebec from 2020. A former client, $64,000. The matter had been settled out of court. He had a current profile on LinkedIn that described him as an independent wealth advisor, but did not mention the license suspension. His address in the Glebe checked out. He did have an office there, or at least a business address. One of those shared executive suite operations where you pay for a mailbox and a boardroom by the hour, and it looks, from the outside, exactly like a real professional practice. Frances sent me what she'd found and asked if I wanted her to do more. I said I'd let her know. I sat with the file for a long time that evening. I thought about the $64,000 in Quebec, and the person who'd lost it, and how long it had probably taken them to save that money. I thought about the investor profile he'd been building on my daughter, her savings, her RRSP, the house I owned outright. I thought about the question he'd asked about my property, and I thought about the fact that my daughter had trusted this man, that she'd brought him into our Sundays, into my kitchen, into the chair where her mother used to sit, that she'd done everything right and it hadn't protected her. I made a list of what I needed. The first thing I needed was to speak with him alone. This required some arranging. I called my daughter and told her I'd thought about it and I wanted to get to know Declan better on my own terms. Could she manufacture a reason for him to come by without her? Something plausible, a favor he could do for me. Something that would make him feel useful and trusted. She thought about it and said she could tell him I was considering reorganizing my retirement savings and that I'd appreciated some of the things he'd mentioned in passing and wondered if he'd be willing to sit down with me. "That'll work," I said. "Dad, are you going to be okay? With him in the house?" "I'll be fine," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. Then, "He did a number on me, didn't he?" "He's done it before," I said. "And he knew exactly what he was doing. That's not on you." She didn't say anything, but I heard her exhale slowly, and I think it was the first time she'd really let herself breathe in weeks. He came on a Wednesday evening, the second week of December. Dark by 4:30, the way it gets here in Ottawa, cold enough that your breath goes ahead of you when you walk. He pulled up in a fairly new Audi, which I noted without surprise. He was punctual. He brought a bottle of wine I didn't ask for, a Niagara Pinot Noir, a nice gesture, well calibrated to the occasion. I made tea and we sat in the living room, which I'd arranged carefully. I'd placed some of my financial paperwork on the side table. Real statements, real accounts, nothing I'd mind him seeing, but enough that the picture they painted was clear. A man with a house, a pension, some registered savings, modest investments in index funds through TD, a comfortable retirement. The kind of thing that, to someone like Declan Marsh, would look like opportunity. He started the way they always start, with questions. Good ones, genuinely. How long had I been in my house? Did I have a financial planner currently? Was I satisfied with the returns on my registered accounts? Was I planning to draw down the RRSP soon or let it grow? Did I have any thoughts about long-term care, about estate planning, about leaving something for my daughter? I answered honestly, or mostly honestly. I let him lead. I watched the way he moved through the information, categorizing it, building the picture. He had good technique. 30 years ago, I might have been impressed. After about 40 minutes, he began, very gently, to introduce an idea. He had a client, he said, a high-net-worth individual, who was putting together a small group of investors for a private lending arrangement. The returns were structured as interest income, which had certain tax advantages. The minimum was $50,000, but given my situation and the existing relationship, his phrase, the existing relationship, he thought he could get me access at 40. I let him finish. I asked a few questions that sounded naive and weren't. He answered with the ease of someone who'd done this many times. Then I said, "That's interesting. Can I ask you something first?" He smiled. "Of course. The investment my daughter made in July," I said, "through your managed account, the pre-IPO round. Can you tell me a bit more about how that's structured?" Something moved behind his eyes, not panic. He was too controlled for panic. More like recalculation. A door he hadn't expected being opened. "Happy to," he said. "It's still in the pre-liquidity phase. So there's not a lot to report yet, but I can put together an update." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "I'd also appreciate the full legal name of the issuer and the CDAR filing number. My daughter mentioned she had a document, but I'd like to verify the details independently." "Force of habit." "Of course," he said. "I'll send that over this week." He didn't ask me why I wanted a CDAR filing number. He didn't ask what force of habit I was referring to. He recovered very smoothly, and we talked for another 20 minutes about nothing consequential. And then he said he had another appointment and thanked me for the tea and left. I watched his Audi back out of the driveway. He never sent the filing number. The following Monday, I contacted the Ontario Securities Commission's Enforcement Branch. I have friends there still. Or not friends exactly, former colleagues, people who know what I used to do and take a call when I make one. I described the situation in full, and I walked them through the document my daughter had given me, and I submitted everything I had from Francis's research, and I gave them Declan Marsh's full name and his office address in the Glee and the numbered companies and the Quebec judgment. I also told them about the wine. The investigator I spoke to, a younger woman who'd been with the branch about 4 years, laughed at that last part. Then she got serious again and said they had capacity to look at it. They already had a file on him, as it turned out. They'd been building it for 7 months. My daughter wasn't the only one. I told my daughter that evening. We spoke on the phone for about an hour. I told her what I'd found, what I'd done, what the likely next steps were. I told her the truth about the investment, which she'd already half known but needed to hear said plainly. The money was probably gone. There might be some recovery through enforcement proceedings, but she shouldn't count on it. $12,000 was real money. It was going to hurt. She was quiet for a while. I was going to put in more, she said, in September when he asked. I almost didn't, I said, because something felt off. I couldn't name it. That's enough, I said as I had before. That's exactly enough. She asked me how I'd known what to look for. I told her properly for the first time a bit of what those 31 years had actually involved, the kinds of cases I'd worked, the patterns I'd learned to recognize. I told her about a case in the late 90s, an advisor in Mississauga who'd taken close to $2 million of clients over 9 years. All of them people who trusted him. Most of them people with modest savings who had no safety net if the money disappeared. I told her we'd gotten him, eventually, and what that had felt like. She listened, and when I finished, she said, "You never told me any of that. Your mother and I wanted you to grow up believing most people were decent," I said. "We weren't wrong to want that." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Most people are, though, aren't they?" "Yes," I said, "they are." Declan Marsh was served with a temporary order by the OSC in February, freezing his accounts and prohibiting him from trading. The investigation proceeded from there. I was not in the room for any of it, which was appropriate. I'd done my part. I was a witness, a source, a door that got opened. The rest belonged to the process. His Ottawa office turned out to be exactly what I'd suspected, a mail suite and a shared boardroom. There was no staff. The boardroom had a window that looked over Bank Street and a coffee machine, and a view, if you wanted to be generous about it. The civil proceedings took time, the way they always do. My daughter gave a statement. She was composed and thorough, and I was proud of her in the way that you're proud of your children when they do something hard, and do it well. The money she lost, most of it came back, eventually. Not all. Some of it had moved through accounts that were difficult to trace. She got back about 8,000 of the 12, which was more than we'd hoped for. She sent me a photograph in March, taken at the Lansdowne market, her in a yellow jacket holding a bunch of tulips, squinting into the sun. No message, just the photograph. I put it on the refrigerator next to a picture of her mother from a canoe trip we took in Algonquin in 2003, both of them grinning in rain jackets, water everywhere. She started seeing someone new in the spring, a physiotherapist she'd met through a mutual friend. She brought him to Sunday lunch in April, and this time when she introduced us, she watched my face very carefully for the first few minutes, and I could see her calibrating, trying to read what I was reading. I didn't slip her a note after lunch. I didn't need to. He was exactly who he said he was. Over dessert, I told a story about a fishing trip I'd taken with her grandfather up near Pembroke. The summer I was 12, and everyone laughed at the right moments, and snow that had been threatening all week finally held off, and the afternoon light came through the kitchen window at that particular angle it only manages in late April, low and golden and lasting just a little longer than you expect. Some Sundays are just Sundays. I've learned to pay attention when they are.